morning to you. Thank you for joining us on Business Morning. I am Bisi Adebayo. We begin with crude oil prices, which are actually lower today as Brent crude fell 0.4% to $43.89 a barrel in early trade and is headed for its biggest weekly loss since June. US WTI was at $41.16 a barrel, down 0.48% and set to post its first weekly drop in weeks. Meanwhile, data from Refinitiv Econ shows the volume of crude arriving China, the world's largest crude importer, is set to slow in September after rising for 5 straight months as its refiners gradually digest bloated inventories. Now, earlier this week, the National Bureau of Statistics published Nigeria's merchandise trade report for the second quarter of 2020. And this brings Nigeria's trade balance, or we saw a shortfall of 27.4% on a year-on-year basis. And this brings Nigeria's trade balance to a deficit of 1.8 trillion naira as agricultural goods export dropped by 38% compared to what we had in the first quarter of 2020, but rose 6.3% year-on-year. Superior quality raw cocoa beans has been reported as the major traded exported agricultural products. But as it appears now, Nigeria is seemingly faced with adverse weather that threatens the output of cash crop, and that means that some financial losses for farmers. But joining us here to discuss the mitigation plans of farmers is the Executive Chairman of Starling Global, Mr. Adeniji Adeyemi. Good morning, and thank you for coming on the program, Mr. Adeyemi.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, sesame seeds was about the most exported agricultural product in the first quarter of 2020, but looking at the second quarter, we saw cocoa outpacing its peers. Tell us what was responsible for that switch.
Well, cocoa is a seasonal crop. It starts September to March, and then it goes down to light crop between March and August. So the production was a bit difficult because of the climate change, and it has affected rainfall, it has affected the export, it has affected the coronavirus. Now started, there was lockdown, and that was the real hammer that hit it terribly.
So how much of a devastating impact has the coronavirus had on cocoa value chain this year?
Oh, terribly. The way it has affected all other aspects of the economy. That's how it has affected it. And it has affected farming generally, because farmers couldn't go to the farms. They couldn't take care of their farms during that period. Everybody was at home. So agricultural commodities needs to be monitored, you need to put in pesticide, you need to put fungicide to make sure that they fruit very well. So this has affected them very terribly.
But apart from the COVID-19 pandemic, what other challenges have cocoa farmers been facing?
Oh, for that one has been there for a very long time. There's never been investment in cocoa production in the last 25 years from the farmer, from the government, from every stakeholder.
And why is that?
Well, it's terrible, but it has always been there because Nigeria used to produce about 570,000 tons of cocoa in the 70s, 71 to 1980. We nosedived it to 300,000 tons in 1995, 96. Now we're on 230,000 tons a year.
Now, has it been all gloom and doom? I mean, would you say that there's been any improvement in the local processing of cocoa for finished products lately?
No. Look at processing. They process about only 10% of the cocoa production, maximum. So the major problem is we are not reinvesting. All the crops, all the trees are old, maybe 100 years, 56 years. If you go to Cross River State, the cocoa was planted in about 56 years ago by Godwin Opera. And after that, subsequent governments have never invested in it. The same thing in the Southwest. So there are so many political statements, cocoa rebirth, everybody getting involved. Government will make political statements, but it's never actualized. So the empirical evidence is the cocoa production is going down instead of it to be going up. So we have been doing it the same way, and that's why we are marching on the same spot. And it's going to continue like that, except we change the direction.
And so, talking about changing the direction now, has there been any engagement between the farmers, of this cocoa plantation and the government, looking at ways to actually boost the cocoa value chain
Well,
in the
I think
country?
unfortunately we have political farmers. The government needs to really go back to what Chief Obafemi Awolowo did in the southwest, what Opara did in the east, and what they did was very simple. They decided to go physical. There was Cocoa Development Unit, where there were nurseries by the government, Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Agric. They will plant cocoa between December and January in the nurseries. Then they would distribute freely to farmers. So farmers, there were quarantine, there were researches on the type of cocoa they need to plant. Then nowadays, if you go to Ivory Coast increased from 1 million tons in about 10 years ago to 2.4 million tons 10 years after. So we could do the same thing. But what you see is there will be government intervention, CBN intervention, promising we are going to put this money, but the money never go to the farmers.
How do you know that? Haven't
Yeah.
you seen some of the farmers who have actually benefited from this government
I'm
intervention?
a farmer myself, and today, Starling is the largest exporter of cocoa beans and cashew from Nigeria. So
Or are you saying
I'm
you've
very
never
close.
benefited from this
Of
scheme?
course, yes. Okay, let me give you an example. Government put intervention in the rice production for Anchor Bora scheme. The price of rice was then 13,000 naira. Today is 25,000 naira per bag. So as it affected them. So the reason is the money did not get to the original farmers. So we need to change the style. Then that's the only way it can work.
Now, when you look at it now, the bulk of export transactions in the second quarter was conducted through the Apapa port. What was the infrastructure experience like within that period?
Very terrible. And I mean very terrible. Yeah, this is the first time the government is doing the road from Oshodi to Apapa. But that has created a very terrible thing and increased the cost of doing the business. Like for Starlink, we have to go on water. We have to hire batches, put your containers on them, take the risk, and at very high price. Then you are not even sure whether you are going to get in. The shipping lines are even more terrible because they are only making money. So it is an opportunity for them to do anything to businessmen. You get to the port, your container will not be picked. These are perishable items. Some containers will be there for 30, 40 days. The quality will have been bad. At the destination, most of them were rejected. So these are really affected so many people to participate in export. So the rules are not good. The infrastructure development, the efficiencies are increasing every day. Then there is terrible hand twisting of the exporters by the shipping lines. And this is where the government needs to work.
So what do you mean by that? Can you
Okay.
expatiate more?
When you get to the port, you are the minister of the shipping lines and the terminal operators because they continue to increase. Don't you see the congestion at the port when they were importing? Because they will make it deliberate not to bring out your containers on time so that they can charge you more. Recently, there were protests at the port because even the importers are in trouble, not to talk about the exporters who are exporting. The rules are bad, then the batches take advantages of it. Then when you get to their ports, their terminal operators, they don't have equipment. Maybe they have one or two cranes, especially the APMT. So you have to go. The only one that is really putting effort is the Grimadi. So it's a very terrible situation. And if care is not taken, if we don't quickly address those issues, it's going to get worse. We need to open the other ports, Calabar port, the one in Onne. We need to look at the road. The road between Onne and Calabar is very terrible. So the roads are not good. So how do we do export from it? It's easier to even come from the north, go through your sesame seed to Calabar. But Calabar is very shallow. It's about 5.4. So bigger vessels cannot come. The Onne that is big, the roads to Onne is very terrible. And there is Niger Delta trouble. So how do we go? So it's a bit trouble. We need to create or use the other ones that we already have and use them maximally. So MPA needs to work.
But with all of these challenges now, just before I let you go, what is your outlook for cocoa exports for the rest of the year?
Well, since it has to do with climatic conditions, if the climate is better, definitely cocoa will fruit and it will get better. But before I conclude, I think it is very important for us to grow what we want to export first. The government needs to support. The government intervention funds from CBN should be directed to like maybe Bank of Industry or Nexim. Those are the ones that are doing very well now. All this intervention will get to the real people if it is segregated and given to people that can manage it properly. Like Nexim, you don't need to know anybody. You just need to apply through your bank and you get the money. So this is the only way we can channel it to get to the real farmers, not the political farmers that have been benefiting from it for a long time.
We would like to appreciate you, the Executive Chairman of Starling Global, Mr. Adeniji Adeyemi, for coming on the program this morning.
Thank you very much.
Now, talking about the announcement of the new ex-depot price of 151 naira 56 kobo on Wednesday by the PPMC, some marketers have adjusted their petrol pump price to between 160 to 162 naira per litre. In a statement by the Major Oil Marketers Association of Nigeria, MOMAN, the chairman, Mr. Tunji Oyebanji, says prices will have to be adjusted to reflect the realities of the increase of ex-depot prices by the PPMC. He, however, explains that the magnitude of increase, timing and allocation is a decision left to each company. But with these developments now, it would appear that technically the federal government has deregulated prices, as the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Mr. Timipre Silva, was quoted on Thursday saying that Nigeria is no longer in the business of fixing fuel price. But joining us now to make sense of these developments is a key player in the oil and gas industry, Mr. Emmanuel Ihanacho. Good morning, Mr. Ihanacho. Thanks for joining us on the program. We'd like to begin with you telling us what exactly is the true picture of the downstream deregulation today, given the new ex-depot price announced by the PPMC.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to your program. When we talk about issues of petroleum prices, we're talking about the issues of the health of the Nigerian economy. For a very long time, we had maintained a regulated regime that regulated the prices of products and regulated the volumes that could be brought in. And basically what happened for so many years was that a subsidy was considered, where government ostensibly, in an effort to better the lot of the common man, was giving subsidized petroleum products to people who came to the pumps to buy. Well, we have always said that this was a very inefficient way to distribute resources, because the people who benefited from regulated prices of petroleum products were not the ones who were supposed to benefit. It benefited car owners, it benefited truck owners, it benefited business owners. Whomsoever drove into the filling station was the beneficiary, not the poor man that it was supposed to go to. And so for years, we had criticized this arrangement. And we had suggested that the best thing to do was to allow market prices determine the volumes that came in, and allow market forces determine the prices that were paid. And so government would be able to save huge amounts that it gave away as subsidies. And so this is what has happened over the course of the past few months. The subsidy regime has been scrapped, or so we hear, but we now have this situation where they're talking about price modulation. What are you modulating? We have a very good example as to how market forces would actually determine prices and volumes. With the deregulation of diesel or AGO, there's no problems.
Now, Mr. Ihanacho, the government, of course, has said that Nigeria is no longer in the business of fixing fuel prices, which, of course, you just confirmed that. And we know that there's no provision for subsidy in the current budget. But what does this then mean for the nation?
Well, what it means really is that market forces really ought to regulate the prices, and the government should be in a position then to accrue a lot of revenue from subsidies that it doesn't have to pay. And then the government would have a lot of money to invest in infrastructure developments. And actually, then government would be able to determine policies that would route help to poor people directly, that goes into their pockets, rather than subsidies that are appropriated to people who shouldn't be having it. So that's where we are. And what we're saying is the price modulation that is being practiced, where from time to time, someone says, well, this is the band within which you can price, doesn't make sense. If you are going to deregulate, you have to go the whole hog to get the full benefits, and that's where we should be.
But what do you make of the decisions of the various groups of marketers like IPMAN members who seem to have agreed to a price while Moman leaves the selling price open?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the question. What have they been doing?
I was asking that what would you make of the decisions by the various groups of marketers, that is, IPMAN members seem to have agreed to a price and Moman on their own part are still leaving the prices open?
Well, it's the confusion that is caused by the intervention of the administration in seeking to call prices and volumes. If the administration withdraws completely from doing it and allows that market forces to determine the volumes that are brought in and the prices at which it would be sold, then there wouldn't be any problem because you would be in a freely competitive situation. If your market offering was not sufficiently competitive, people will buy from your competitors. But now we have a situation where people don't know what to do. So shall we obey? We make a little bit of profit here, and the system is a little bit efficient, but not quite as efficient as it should be. I think that the solution to all this confusion is really for us to decree full deregulation, just like we did with diesel, and allow that market forces will determine the prices and volumes that are brought in. Incidentally, by the way, that is the best way that the common man will benefit from the situation that we have in hand, because it will result in a situation where government will have sufficient revenues to determine palliatives that would go direct to the poor man rather than be appropriated by people who can very well afford to pay the full price of petroleum products.
But then how justifiable would we say is a sudden change in price by the marketers, considering the off-the-shelf stock of these dealers?
Well, the truth of the matter is that some of those marketers are acting arbitrarily, because if you want to look at a logical basis for some of the pricing that they are adopting, you have pointed to the fact that one group of marketers are adopting one set of prices and another group of marketers are adopting another set of prices. They are all satisficing. They are not actually optimizing. They really should come together, make a proper presentation to government to say that both the government and the people will benefit optimally if we absolutely deregulate. There is no way that anybody will have monopoly prices if you are at liberty to go into the market yourself and put your products out there and depress the prices. That is the way that we'll have equilibrium pricing, which is what everybody should actually be aiming for.
So, but why we'll wait to see if that would happen? By the time Moman members come up with their price, what's the average price that you anticipate?
Well, I can't anticipate anything because my organization is not a member of Moman, and I'm not entirely sure what the decision process in Moman, how it is determined. So I can't really anticipate. I'm thinking that it's very easy for you to see a template if you want to say, where is the imported template, and we can show it to you, and you can see what the landing price of the product would be, and you can then compare it to what people are charging. I think that what the government should do is what they set out to do months ago, absolutely ensure that there is no further intervention by any government agency in calling prices and volumes with respect to the trade in PMS.
A key player in the oil and gas industry, Mr. Emmanuel Ihanacho, thanks for speaking with us on Business Morning today.
Thank you. Nice talking to you.
All right, we'll be talking about business digitalization and automation when we return in just a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The trend of digitization processes and automation of the business environment has been on the rise lately, and this is just as Nigeria ramps up processes for data protection, electronic means of identification, and the recent ratification of $3 billion for the automation of its ports. While experts advise companies to get ready for a future that will depend on end-to-end digitization, breaches in internet security protocols remains one of the top concerns of local local businesses. And joining us now to speak to these developments and other matters arising in the ICT space is the Executive Director and co-founder of SeamFix, Mr. Chibuzo Onwura. Good morning, Mr. Onwura. Thanks for joining us on the program. Tell us, how relevant is digitization and automation of business processes in today's world across the public and private institutions, and the culture needed to realize digital transformation?
Thanks and good morning. I'm happy to be here. Digitization is essentially the ability to convert from analog to digital. And of course, when you are able to get this analog to digital ability, and then you are also able to influence your processes so that you improve. If you were doing this in a manual way before, you become digital, you become optimized. Then you are beginning to talk about digitalization. And then also digital transformation now talks about the culture of change, of adaptability, the ability to move fast, the ability to be customer centric, and then also apply that technology into solving your customer problems. If you consider the world we live in today, the COVID pandemic that just happened, you will realize that businesses that were optimized for delivery, even without dealing physically with their customers, were able to thrive, and those that were not had to suffer. So if you ask me, I think it's very relevant at this time for anybody, anyone in business, whether you're in the public sector or in the private sector, to truly consider digitization and digitalization. You need to transform your operations so that you can serve your customers better. And as for culture, it starts with one, having a customer focus. You need to be obsessed about your customer, whether your customer is a citizen that walks into the government door or somebody paying you for your good or service. When you obsess about that person, then you are interested in solving their problems. You are interested in making them happy. You also need to have a culture of learning. You need to want to be able to learn, want to change, want to adapt. And then finally, you need to be agile, to not just learn, but also apply what you have learned. If you have that agility, that customer focus, and the ability to learn, then you're ripe for digital transformation.
Now, for me as a journalist, I can probably understand the digitalization of the media industry in Nigeria, but how well has Nigeria done generally in digitalization and digitization of processes?
Well, I think we are not doing too badly, although we can do a lot more. Like I explained when I just talked about digital transformation, there's also a culture shift, a mindset shift that needs to happen. So we are at the beginning stages, if you ask me. With a lot of our government institutions and businesses are beginning to employ technology more in how they do their processes. But then it needs to seep in. It needs to get more into the culture of the way of life of everyone that is involved, be it the staff of the parastatals, be it the actual business owners, their employees. This has to seep in more and more. I think the recent pandemic that happened showed it to everyone that really, really, really there is no option. And what we are beginning to see is businesses beginning to use technology more. In Nigeria, people are beginning to use social media more so that their customers can discover them more. We are beginning to have cases of courts in various states that are now going online because they realize that citizens must go on. The legal system must go on, whether you're working from home or not. So yes, I think we are on our way. We are getting there. We are improving. We're not there yet, but the right ingredients are there. It's left for us to take it and run.
Well, yes, many may probably have seen the need to embrace technology as it is, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which, of course, you have also alluded to. But then there are some who are still asking, what do corporates stand to benefit from this?
Well, I think the world is changing, and it's changing very fast. Many corporates will need to realize that their customers are no longer those who they can see physically and can walk in through the door. In fact, their competition is no longer just Emeka down the street. Their competition is global. Their customers, the customer base, the potential is global as well. So if you're a business and you realize that you can scale out what you do and you can have untold impact just by your adopting a digital culture in your company, then I think it's a no-brainer. Same thing for government. If you realize that in government, in your parastatal, you can reach out as a federal government. You can service a lot more Nigerians simply by adopting technology. You can financially include them, you can give them an identity, you can provide social services to them without them needing to travel long distances to your offices. And you realize that it's literally a no-brainer. For us, there are certain things we say. There are 7 reasons why we think any business typically should consider consider digital transformation and digitization. You get a lot of insights into what is going on in your business, a lot of data, and you can now make relevant business decisions from that data. You have more access to customers. You can improve your service quality. Your customer experience is better. You just need to take a look at digital banks today and how a lot of the millennials are more interested in banking with the digital banks that are on their phone rather than walking into the banking hall. And of course, all this leads to an increase in revenue for you, and it helps you ensure business continuity. I think all these sound like music to the ears of any entrepreneur and of any government, any serious person in government. So there should be no second guessing. There should be no doubt about it. We're on to speak using some examples that I have seen during this pandemic. We had various banks that utilized our solutions for customer onboarding, ramp up the customers they were able to get, even though the banking halls were shut. The truth of the matter was that their mobile apps and their staff were able to still acquire customers and sell services to them, in essence, extending the banking hall into the homes of their customers. We had the telcos utilizing our services for customer onboarding also see a rise in their customer onboarding because people didn't need to travel. They could still get services in their homes. So the question for you and the question to any business is, do all these matter to you? Do you want to grow? And if you want to grow in the 21st century, digital transformation is the way.
But one major issue is that how do we address the concerns of internet protocol security that is often breached by hackers today, and that's coupled with the rate of cyber attacks and frauds in the banking system?
Well, cyber security and cyber fraud is a global phenomenon. Nigeria is not alone. We do not stop traveling because we have fears of accidents. What we do is to try and mitigate the risks. What we do is try to drive down the likelihood of that happening down to zero. But you do not stop traveling, you do not stop going to work, you do not stop going to see your family members because you think that there will be an accident on the road. So the same thing happens here. If digital transformation and a digital ecosystem is key, then we need to go ahead and not turn back because of cyber crimes. Now, having said that, you will realize that cyber crimes they are very successful many times thanks to the naivety of those involved. So both the banks and the institutions and the businesses have a role to play, but the individuals also have a role to play, and that's where a lot of education coming. You realize that many of the frauds include phishing attacks, include social engineering, fake websites, stealing of ATM pins. Some of these things are low tech, they are not high tech. So we tend to think of hacks and frauds and we think of a hacker behind the system or behind hundreds of systems. Oftentimes, it's as simple as your neighbor looking over your shoulder and stealing your pin or sending you fake websites. And then when you go there, you give them your data and then they have access to your account. So there's a lot of education and re-education that needs to keep going on to let people understand the dangers and how they should protect themselves. As long as we continue to do this, and at the same time, institutions that choose to undergo digitalization keep adding processes that help them mitigate these frauds, then we'll all be the better for it.
Now, this brings us to the role of the government. Now, how well has the government actually done in the area of digitalization and business automation?
That's an interesting question. The government has tried in the sense that there are some foundational things to consider when you talk about digitalization. There's a digital infrastructure that needs to be provided, and the government has gone some way in enabling the telecoms ecosystem such that we have connectivity around us. But more needs to be done. We need to have more broadband penetration around the country. Also, we need a strengthening of our digital platforms and government services. Government, again, is doing something in that regard with the provision of the national identity, which is key for the digital economy. As long as you can identify citizens, it becomes easier to provide services to them. Again, the government is making strides in this. All citizens are not yet covered, but many have been, and there are strides being done there. If you also look at the policy, the policy framework, because the laws are also very crucial. The laws need to evolve to take cognizance of this new world, of this new digital economy. And again, the government is making some strides there with the NDPR and various other data protection laws that are, that are coming up and being enforced, or policies that are evolving. So the government is making some strides there. And then finally, ICT skills, investments in training, and bringing up, bridging the gap, so that we don't just have people in Lagos, in Abuja, being the ones with the IT skills. Government needs to play a role in bridging the gap, so that people from low income areas and the rural areas are also able to gain some of the skills needed to thrive in a digital economy. So I would say the government is making some moves, and they have actually been trying. More needs to be done, of course. Uhuru is not yet here.
And talking about the government making some moves now, of course, we saw the government recently concluding to have digital identification as a replacement of the plastic national ID card. Does that speak to digitization or just some cost-cutting measures, perhaps?
I think it's a bit of both, because obviously a digital identity, either on your mobile phone or you printing out the slip by yourself, is cheaper than provision of the identity card. But we have to remember what exactly identity is here. We've always had digital identity in truth. For a long time, the government has actually enrolling us biometrically and providing us with a NIN number. We've all had digital identities. So the plastic card is just that. It's just a physical token for you to show your identity. It's no different from the NIN slip that you print out, and it's no different from the number that you remember in your head. What matters is what you do with that identity. So if the economy, if government institutions, if various businesses are able to leverage that number to verify it and verify that you are who you say you are, and then provide services to you, then that's all that matters. We all bank today with our BVN. We all have our BVN numbers. We all know our account numbers. Of when you were in school, you had your matric number. And as long as you had those numbers could identify you, and we could verify who you were and provide services to you. So it's not so much about the card. It's a physical token that would have been nice to have. But I think also the fact that the government is moving to, getting us to utilize a digital ID, showing it on mobile, helps us realize that we actually have a digital identity and it should be verified. I think it's a laudable move. Helps the government to save.
All right, we'd like to thank you, Executive Director and co-founder of SeamFix, Mr. Chibuzo Onwura, for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
In other news now, in efforts to counter a likely shortfall of maize and corn in the country, the central bank has granted approval to 4 agro-processing companies to import 262,000 tons of the commodity. According to a statement released by the Nigeria Customs Service, the 4 companies approved are Premier Feed Mills, which is expected to import 120,000 tons, Chi Farms Limited, 60,000 tons, Crown Flour Mills, 22,000 tons, and Wakat Limited, which will be importing 30,000 tons of the commodity. The statement further explains that the companies will only be allowed to import the commodities within 4 months, starting from August to October this year. On July the 14th, the CBN announced the restriction of forex for maize imports in its efforts to encourage local production of the commodity. Well, let's get a review of yesterday's trading activities at the Nigerian equities markets with Edidiong Iwang. Good morning, Eddie. So we've seen the positive momentum still being sustained at the markets.
Good morning, BC. You're right. The markets gained for the 5th straight session yesterday, and that was due to buying interest on MTN Nigeria and some banking stocks. The all-share index was up 0.20% to 25,511.02 points, while the market cap was at 13.308 trillion naira. Now, that brought the month-to-date gain to about 0.7%, while the year-to-date loss moderated to minus 4.96%. The activity chart was mostly positive yesterday as we saw 232.41 million units worth 1.31 billion naira, all traded in 3,377 deals. The sectoral chart was also mostly positive. The banking index was up yesterday due to gains from Zenith Bank, GT Bank, UBA, Wema Bank and Jaiz Bank. I would also like to point out that yesterday Zenith Bank also released impressive earnings, and they're proposing a dividend of about 30 kobo per every 50 kobo share. Consumer goods was up yesterday. That was single-handedly driven by Vitafoam. Industrial goods was unchanged. Insurance was up, while oil and gas was unchanged. We didn't see any movement on that counter yesterday. And moving to the unlisted securities market, the NSI was positive by 0.67% at 714.21 points, while the market cap was at 524.64 billion naira. The activity chart was slightly better than Thursday's. On Wednesday's session, we saw 11,890 units worth 518.447 thousand naira, and all of that was changed in 3 deals. Well, let's talk to Charles Fakroga, the chief dealer at Citico Trust and Investment Company. Good morning, Mr. Fakroga. Thank you for joining us on the program. Oh, well, I'm being told that Mr. Fakroga is not ready. Yes, let's talk about the fixed income market now. The bond market was a bit positive yesterday. Now, despite the increased liquidity, the bond market sentiments were weak. Investors have become wary of bonds and the yield on that counter. But I'm being told that Mr. Fakroga is with us now. Good morning, Mr. Fakroga. Thank you for joining us on the program. Well, Zenith Bank released its earnings yesterday, showing gross earnings of the group increased by 4.4%, and the company is also proposing a dividend of 30 kobo per share. What would you make of the earnings by the Tier 1 lender?
Yeah, I'm not hearing you.
Hello, Mr. Fakroga, can you hear me? All right, I think we've lost Mr. Fakroga there. Let's just go on with the fixed income market. The bond market, we saw 61 deals worth 40.26 billion naira. The Nigerian Treasury bills market, we saw some activity on that counter yesterday. There was a bit of... We saw yield expanding at the short end of the curve, while the long end remained flat. We had 27 deals worth 6.98 billion naira. The OMO market, on the other hand, average yields contracted by 15 basis points at the OMO secondary market as participants looked forward to cover lost bids at the OMO auction. We had 25 deals worth 35 billion naira. But I guess we'll have to leave it there, and we'll have to talk to our analysts when we return. Over to you, BC.
All right, Eddie Young. Well, we'll see if we'll get through to Mr. Fakroga. But even if we're not able to talk to him, okay, I think Mr. Fakroga is finally ready for us. So over to you, Eddie.
Thank you, BC. Hello, Mr. Fakroga. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, Zenith Bank released its earnings yesterday, showing the group's revenue rose by 4.4%, and they're also proposing a dividend of 30 kobo per every 50 kobo share. How would you say that Zenith Bank performed within the period?
Yes, well, thank you very much. We operators in the market were not surprised of the performance of Zenith Bank. The bank is a leader in that sector, in that space. And, we all waited for that result to come out, and the result is how. Investors are happy. We must commend the management of Zenith Bank for that performance, looking at the harsh economic situation in which they are operating. I think the bank management must be commended. And of course, we must also commend Nigerian Stock Exchange for creating that enabling environment in terms of transparency, and that enabling environment for the bank to perform very well.
All right, Mr. Fakroga, thank you for your input on the program. Charles Fakroga is the chief dealer at Citico Trust and Investment Company. But we'll have to leave it there for now, BC.
Thank you, and Didion. We'll get right back to you in just a moment for a review of the debt and currencies markets, and we'll also see what's happening at the London markets. Please stay with us. Now let's travel to the UK, where Juliana Olayinka is standing by to discuss the major headlines making the rounds this morning. Good morning, Juliana. The Trades Union Congress is urging Rishi Sunak to launch a wage subsidy scheme to prevent a tsunami of unemployment when furlough comes to an end. The union is also asking for a continental-style system of short-time working wage supports to be used in Britain to save millions of jobs from redundancy. Of course, this is definitely more pressure on Rishi Sunak, isn't it?
It is more pressure on Chancellor Rishi Sunak, though I've got to say this is not going to be keeping him awake at night. I believe the Tory government have got more pressure coming from within their own ranks, because there are fears that they will be asking certain members of society to pay more tax. But as we all know, we've been discussing it all week on this programme. The furlough scheme is coming to an end. It will be ending at the end of October. The furlough scheme was the government's subsidy scheme, so they were paying people's wages whilst telling them to work from home. It has been assisting 9 million people. And according to the latest reports, 2 weeks ago, about 2.5 million people were still depending on that scheme. There have been calls from certain union groups and, of course, the Labour opposition party to try and extend the scheme. We have seen similar extensions taking place in Germany, France, Austria, and even Ireland. And what the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, are calling on is some sort of style where the government will compensate employers for taking their staff back on, but at a part-time rate. So they basically compensate the firm for less productivity. Now, these calls have been going on for the past couple of months. I think we've had concrete statements from the Bank of England, especially the Governor, Andrew Bailey, saying the furlough scheme is completely unaffordable. And time again, we have heard from Chancellor Rishi Sunak saying it will be coming to an end. Also as well, on Wednesday, during the first Prime Minister's questions after recess, Prime Minister Boris Johnson was asked this question. He did say on the record that the furlough scheme will be coming to an end at the end of October, but he did allude to the fact that the government have the job retention scheme bonus, where for every employer, every employee that a firm takes on, they will be receiving £1,000.
Now, Treasury figures show restaurants have claimed more than 100 million meals worth £522 million under the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, and the Treasury is saying that the figures are likely to rise as outlets have until the end of September to claim. How's this news being digested?
Well, the furloughs, the Eat Out to Help Out, furlough, Eat Out to Help Out, that's coming to an end. Well, it's ended. It ended on Monday. More information is coming out about this. It has been heralded as a great scheme. It got many worried, nervous customers to go back into restaurants and eat in. So what it was is that you could receive up to 50% bonus of capped at £10 on your food and on your beverages. And it wasn't just a burger joint. You know, the best Michelin-starred restaurants in Mayfair were also offering this service. Not a lot of people thought it would be a success at the start, but it has been a roaring success. The government budgeted £500 million. It actually cost £522 million, and it certainly did see, and it helped boost activity in the hospitality sector. We know that because we just had the PMI data from services, and it does show a massive increase in August. The issue is, of course, it is coming to an end, and there are concerns that, once this does stop, then are people going to be going back into restaurants? But again, more information out about a scheme that's ended.
Well, just before you go, Juliana, let's talk about this data from retail analysis firm Springboard, which shows that the number of empty shops on UK high streets has risen to its highest level in 6 years. And that's as city centres and especially London suffer from a dive in visitor numbers thanks to COVID-19. But tell us, how bad is the situation?
Well, the situation is bad, Bissy. Again, this is something that we've been following and we've been talking about. It's been a massive talking point this week, especially because when Prime Minister Boris Johnson held his cabinet meeting on Tuesday, first day back in the office, he did say that he said workers are going back into the offices in their swaves. But the truth is they're not. We're seeing this in the fall in passenger numbers. We're seeing this in the fall of people on the high street. And it is a lot of these workers that do support the local high streets, because a lot of office hubs are around these areas. And of course, a lot of people are not getting coffee in the mornings. They're not buying outfits that they want to wear on the weekend. And it is seeing the death and the fall of high street numbers. Last month, we did actually see a peak in retail sales, but a lot of this was online sales, and a lot of these sales in retail were offering games and consoles, not clothing. So it is a major issue, especially because people are still fearful. But the government have launched a campaign this week, a huge media campaign to try and get people out and about again, even though the coronavirus is still with us. But yeah, the truth of the reality is numbers are still down. People are still scared of COVID-19.
I can imagine. And what's top on the mind of everyone is actually to remain safe this period. Thank you, Juliana. We'll see you much later in the afternoon.
Thank you.
Now we're getting back to Eddie Young to tell us more about the debt and currencies market. Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you, BC. Well, we'll just jump right into our conversation with Nkem Azinge, a fixed income dealer at UBA. Good morning, Nkem. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, could you tell us more about the turnout of CBN's OMO auction yesterday?
Okay, yeah, so the CBN offered 100 billion yesterday across the maturities, the short end, the long end, the mid end, and the short end. We saw subscription of 144.6 billion, which is typically, which we say is not that high. And we saw stop rates decline on the shorter end, just very marginally, to 4.86 from 4.85, but then stop rates on the mid and the long end were maintained at 7.68 and 8.94. So that's basically what happened in the OMO auction yesterday. And just due to the fact that the OMO was oversubscribed, we saw that little oversubscription flow into the secondary market and cost yields to compress a bit.
So how do you see that affecting or influencing trading at the OMO market today?
Well, the market is, I wouldn't say awash with liquidity right now, but awash with liquidity following the maturity. There was 321 billion that matured on Thursday, and only 100 billion was taken out. So there is a bit of liquidity. So we expect that we would still see buying sentiment in the OMO space today. And also, given the fact that the CBN has started selling in the I&E space, we've also seen foreign players come and try and sell off some of their own papers in the bid to try to leave. And so we'll see banks probably try and soak up that supply that's coming into the market.
Okay, but what's also your outlook for trading at the bonds and treasury bills market for today?
Okay, the bond space has been mixed all week. It started off bearish, but then it turned bullish midweek. So we expect that would continue. We have expectations of coupon payments coming in later in the month, and we also have OMO maturities coming in next week. So we expect the players who have these maturities who are unable to reinvest their OMO maturities in the OMO space would probably take those liquidities to the bond space. So we'll continue to see demand there, and that would continue to push yields lower.
Okay, what of the Nigerian treasury bills markets? That side of the market has been really quiet lately. What should we be expecting?
Just given the fact that rates are now at 2% for the December maturity, 3% for like the May maturity, we don't expect there to be much activity there. We'll see retail players come into that space to cherry pick, especially given the fact that the CBN just reduced the interest rates on saving deposits to a minimum of 1.25. So we'll probably see more retail players go into that space. And following that as well, we did see some domestic financial institutions also come over to play in the treasury bill space, just following the reduction in deposit rates. So we'll probably see that liquidity move into that space and taper yields a bit.
Okay, just before I let you go, I mean, UBA was the first bank to release its earnings. How was the fixed income side of the earnings in the report?
The interest income increase. It seemed like obviously there was a lot of pressure during the period, just given the fact that rates decreased compared to last year. But all in all, they were able to maintain interest income from trading at reasonable rates.
All right, Nkem, thank you for your input on the program. Nkem Anzenge is a fixed income dealer at UBA, but we'll have to leave you for there. Over to you, BC.
All right, Edith Young, thank you. We'll hope that the markets will, of course, continue to trade in positive direction. And that's our program today and the last for the week. Thank you for watching. I am BC at Dubai. I'll see you in a bit.